With this, I want to invite Colin and Garret, fellow Trojans, authors, professors, speakers, and they are one of the first ones to create a program, a course in the university on sales for entrepreneurs. So it's all, their course is called Unsold Mindset, and they have just come up with a book which is also called Unsold Mindset. So without further ado, here are Colin and Garret. Go Trojans.
Were you nervous, Colin, coming up here?
I was nervous that was exactly what was going to happen. I was going to ask how they were going to do it, and no one was going to say anything.
A lot of times what happens is we'll come up on stage and they'll say, you know, do you guys want a walk-up song?
Thank you.
And we're supposed to have kind of a typical walk-up song, but every once in a while they ask me and not Colin, and I'll put up a song. So on Wednesday, we were doing a speech in front of 600 or 700 people in Palm Springs, and we walked up to Miley Cyrus' Party in the USA, and his face was hilarious because it takes him a good 2 or 3 minutes to get going. Today he's going to be ready to go now.
No. Let's be clear. He told me that we were going to be walking up to Jay-Z.
Correct.
That's what took me so long to get my composure, but that's okay.
Well, we are very excited to be here. Thank you all for having us. We've been hearing about the organization TiE for a really long time, and we've even had conversations tangentially about coming up to speak. So we're super grateful to be up here today. I think as far as an agenda goes, we should fill in some blanks on our bios just so that everybody knows why we're up here and what we talk about.
Cool.
And then we'll talk for about 45 minutes or so on some lessons that we've been learning in our journey as we've gone from practitioners in the startup space to now professors and authors writing about sales mindset. And if I can shut Colin up fast enough, we'll leave some time for Q&A, but as you'll soon see, he really likes to chat, so
it's taken him 26 seconds to make fun of me. I just want everybody to recognize that.
But what did I miss?
What did you miss? Okay, we do this a lot. We're on stages every month, and half the time we're in front of really successful people, and we call those people hitters. And when you're in front of a room full of hitters, a lot of times you'll run into a bunch of knowers. They know everything. But sometimes there's a rare occasion where we're in a room full of hitters, but there's still a room full of learners. And when we were having our conversations earlier around prep, we were assured that not only were we going to be speaking in front of a room full of hitters, but we were going to be speaking in front of a room full of learners. And that's really, really important to us for, I think, one big reason. All of you, everyone in the world basically, has access to the same books, to the same TED Talks, to the same trainings, right? So if everyone has access to the same content, why is it that only 20% of any given organization is thriving and the other 80% are still trying to figure it out if they're consuming the same information? And that's what we're going to talk to you about today. As learners, we're really excited to be here. There's no walk-up song, so I'm feeling really comfortable.
Yes, you're ready to go.
I say we go.
Really quick introductions, just so that you all have the background. I did not start my career thinking that I would be on stage in front of you all talking about sales. I started my career as a lawyer a long time ago, and it was miserable. I hated every part of it. I hated counting every 6 minutes of my day. The thing that I did love was that my clients were startups. And so eventually I realized, not eventually, it took me 3 years, I realized that I needed to get out of there, and then I joined my first startup. And the easy way to get a foot in the door at a startup, as many of you know, is through the sales organization. So I became a salesperson, and then as is the case with many startups, I was lucky enough to climb the ranks pretty quickly because there were no rules, and that helped me. I didn't know what the rules were, I didn't have a playbook, I did not come from a sales background. I started my career as a salesperson. By the end of my first startup, I was running sales and business development. We sold that off. It was not super exciting, but then I joined another startup with the crew that I was working with on the first one, and that was an enterprise software startup called Bidium. And that one I joined as the chief revenue officer. At the very beginning, I was the only non-technical person in that room. I was sales, I was marketing, I was customer success, I was cleaning the toilets, I was whatever needed to be done to get this thing off the ground. And we started to do that. And after about 1.5 years or so, we started to actually build some traction, build a sales organization. I needed somebody way smarter than me to help me do that at a global scale. That's where this handsome fella joins the conversation, and I'll let him talk about that a little bit. But then side by side, we spent about 3.5 years together building up the rest of that company, which we finally sold at the end of 2017 to Google. And that was one of those exits that we're all hoping for our portfolios and for ourselves. Got to go to Google after that. And then people started asking us, how did you do it? What did you do it? Oh, we don't talk like that. No, a lady never tells. So we started finding ourselves on stages, and people seemed to respond to the things we said. We started finding ourselves in front of classrooms and doing guest lectures globally, literally. And USC came to us and they said, the response to your class, your guest lectures has been great. Would you guys like to create a class? And we said, hell yes, we would like to create a class. And so over time, we started building out our curriculum and doing research and interviewing people and doing the things that we're going to talk to you about today, the things that we discovered. And we created our class, Sales Mindset for Entrepreneurs. And it is the only sales mindset class in all of higher education. And we're really proud of it. It's become a pretty popular class at USC. That led to the conversations with the publishing companies, and our book, The Unsold Mindset, comes out in February, and that was a whole other process of research and interviews, which we're going to talk about today. And the other favorite thing we do is get up in front of people like you. So that was longer than I wanted it to be. I know you're going to make fun of me, so I'll preempt you there.
I just want everyone to realize that he said I was the one that was going to talk a lot.
Just wait, everybody. Just wait.
And also, to the gentleman's question who asked how much, let's just put it this way. When I met Garret, he drove in with a Nissan Leaf. And when he left the building, he had a Tesla X. So that's like a good indication that you're on the upward trajectory? Okay, cool. What do you need to know about me? First and foremost, grew up hating sales. Just like real yucky disdain for it, like who wants to be a salesperson when they grow up? I certainly didn't go to college to be a salesperson. And back then, I had no idea that if you were a CEO, an engineer, a marketer, you were a salesperson. Back then, I just thought you worked at Nordstrom's or you worked at the car lot. And I just, I thought I was better than it, to be honest. And when I graduated college, I soon found out that I had a choice to make, which was take the first job that I could get or move back in with my parents. I never moved back in with my parents. The only job that was available to me was a sales job. And it wasn't just any sales job. It was like this karmatic experience of like a punk 21-year-old kid who had talked shit about sales his entire life and then enters into basically a boiler room situation. And I sucked. I was horrible. I couldn't close a door, let alone close a person. And on the third month, I got put on what's called a PIP. Raise your hand if you know what a PIP is. Hopefully from giving them, not from receiving them. But for all of you who did not raise your hand, a PIP stands for a performance improvement plan. It's a nice way of saying I was going to get fired. So on my third month, I did what any 21-year-old self-entitled blame displacer would do. I decided if I was going to get fired, I would screw the establishment over on my way out. Makes sense, right? I ditched the script. I only started asking questions that I actually wanted to know the answers to. I only laughed at jokes that I actually thought were funny, just like weird stuff. That was the month, obviously, that I broke the sales record. And for the next 6 years, I was leading teams of hundreds of people that were 30, 40, sometimes even 50 years my senior. And the only thing that I was teaching them was this trick that I had realized during, my third month on that PIP, which was that the greatest salespeople on the planet are the exact opposite of who we think they are. And I was trying to be such a damn good salesperson, and I was so bad. And the minute that I tried to be the opposite of a good salesperson, something miraculous happened. I started to sell. I started to sell a lot, and I started to look at the people I was talking to as human beings, and they stopped looking at me like a salesperson, and they started looking at me like a human being. And that company ended up getting acquired, and then we fast forward, and I was in business intelligence, and that was a great run, and then I went into apps and had a couple more acquisitions, and I was in the entertainment industry with my last startup acquisition. And a recruiter called me right after the acquisition, and he said, "I know you think the entertainment industry is sexy. Do you want to know what's really sexy?" I said, "What?" He said, "Software security."
Yeah,
I said, "Okay." And I walked into a room and I met this guy. And this is where my introduction ends and sort of our introduction begins. Because the same thing that we talked about in that room for 3 hours, even though it's supposed to be a 30-minute conversation, is the same thing that we wrote about in this book for HarperCollins. It's the same thing we teach about at USC every single day, and it's the same thing that we talk about on every stage, including this one, which is the greatest salespeople on the planet are not the most gregarious. They're not the most extroverted. They're not the most self-confident. They're the most self-aware. They know that they said something and it didn't land, and they were able to course correct real time. They weren't the most sociable, but they were the most socially aware. So they knew that when they were talking to someone, that person did not think that they were actually listening. They thought that they were waiting to speak. And they were able to change that immediately. They weren't pathologically optimistic and thought that everyone was going to buy because they were naive. They were pathologically optimistic because when you talk to someone like you don't need anything from them, there's a vibe you can't manufacture. And so all of these conversations that we've been having are so representative in our class, because all of you need to realize something if it's not obvious already. Everybody sells. So a third of our class shows up every Monday night at USC because they want to learn how to sell themselves, right? They want to be leaders. They want to go out and raise money. They want to build relationships, and they want people to want to walk through walls for them. You've got a third of the people that show up every single week and they want to sell ideas. They also want to be the future leaders and entrepreneurs, but also engineers and marketers, and they want to be able to sell the picture. And then you got a third of the people, and they're the crazy ones. They actually want to sell products and services.
And that diversity that we have in our class was reflected in the diversity of the conversations we were having as we were building out the curriculum, as we were starting to write our book. We're talking to all these different people, and even though they didn't know each other, they were sounding the same, and they were telling us the same thing. So I think we should start with the beginning of our journey. Our journey really started with 2 questions that we ask. We've asked it in front of audiences for years. We've asked it to almost every salesperson that we've talked to, that we've coached, that's sold to us. I want to ask it to you. That first question is, what do you think of when you hear the word salesperson? Remember, we're asking people that sell, people that don't sell, or that don't think they sell. What do you think the answers are that we hear when we ask people that? Just shout them out.
Honest answers, please.
Used car.
Used car. Sleazy. Annoying. Okay, we get it. We get it. We get it.
All right.
Pushy was the last one.
That's right.
Okay. So that's the first question that we ask every room.
And that's typical, by the way. We get that. Every once in a while, the room's nicer, and they spare our feelings a little bit more, and they'll say extroverted, or won't, they don't give up easily. Something that still has a little bit of a negative connotation. The sentiment is clear. We do not like salespeople.
Yeah. Now, here's the other question that we ask every room. Who's the greatest salesperson you can think of?
Donald Trump.
I heard Obama. I heard what else?
Sorry, Steve Jobs, Obama. What else? McDonald. Who? Elon Musk. Trump. Children. Our parents. Okay. Yourself. Okay, let's stop for a second. You're great. Let's use you as an example. I just asked you, what do you think of when you hear the word salesperson? You said sleazy, yucky, manipulative, and then I asked you who the greatest salesperson was you know, and you said yourself. Somebody said their children. Somebody said their parents. And you want to know what's wild? We do this in front of thousands of people every month, and the 2 most popular answers are Martin Luther King Jr. and Steve Jobs. How crazy is that? Think about that incongruence. We asked you what you thought of when you heard the word salesperson. You said yucky, and then we said who you think of when you think of the greatest salesperson you know, and you're talking about Martin Luther King Jr. And that incongruence is why we write this book and why we teach this class and why we're talking to you today.
So that's the journey that we went on. We started out thinking that we were doing research for a sales class and a sales book. So we started talking to salespeople. We talked to the top salesperson at Cisco, the top salesperson at Adobe, at startups that we've invested in, right? And we would ask them what made them great and try to figure that out. And then we would ask them at the end, who's the greatest salesperson you know? And maybe early on we would get, my first sales manager or the CEO of my company. And then we would go talk to that first sales manager or that CEO. We'd ask them the same things, and we would triangulate. And then we would ask them, who's the greatest salesperson you know? Immediately after that, we are out of the sales organization, and now we are having conversations with doctors and lawyers and artists and actors and Snoop Dogg and all of these different people.
Don't just say Snoop Dogg like that.
Well, I mean, we talked to some cool people that are very successful in a variety of arenas that do not have sales in their title. And all of them were sounding the same. They were all telling us the same things, and they had no idea that they were doing it.
I just want to give an example, since he just dropped Snoop Dogg. Let me pick up that name drop on the floor for you real quick. Give that back to you. So we interviewed the #1 salesperson at Beyond Meat. We said, hey, why are you great? And who's the #1 salesperson you know? And he told us why he was great, and he said, the best salesperson I know is John Wexler. He was the general manager of Yeezy, and then he was the head of influencer marketing at Adidas. He was the first person to ever give a shoe deal to a non-athlete, and now he's head of Fanatics. Anyways, he's a boss. And so we went to him. Not a sales professional, but certainly the #1 salesperson at Beyond Meat said he was the best salesperson he knew. So we go to John Wexler and say, hey, John, who's the #1 salesperson you know? Who's the best salesperson you know? He said, without a doubt, Snoop Dogg. He taught me authenticity. So we go to Snoop Dogg, and we ask Snoop Dogg, Snoop, who's the best salesperson you know? And he said, my mom.
We did not talk to Snoop's mom, but we did ask. He said no.
How crazy, I mean, guys, I want everyone to just realize like what we're talking about here is we went to sales professionals to ask them who the best salesperson was they knew, and they gave us a professional that sold, but not a traditional salesperson.
Exactly. So now let's dig into some of the stuff we found. There's no clock up here, so is somebody going to give us
I'm looking
towards?
at timing.
Oh, you got okay.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Excellent.
All right.
Excellent.
Great.
Give us like a 5. Give us like a 10 and a 5 to Q&A, and I'll try to shut him up. But I want to tee you up on something.
I have a clock here.
Okay. Good.
Okay.
I want to tee you up. I think on the first category of things, and we sort of touched on it already.
Yep.
But one of the big things that all of these people have in common is this like unfiltered sense of authenticity. And that sounds very cliche, we understand that, but when you see the way that they set themselves up with an infrastructure to allow themselves and the people around them to be authentic, I think it'll make a lot more sense.
Yeah, and I'll give you, I think, a really familiar scenario that all of you should have seen at some point in your life. Someone comes into an organization and they want to be good. And for some strange reason, they don't think that their normal, flawed, authentic self is fit for the job. So they pretend to be like a better version of whoever they're supposed to be. And something horrible happens, because when you pretend to be someone you're not, this eventually happens. You're unsuccessful. You don't hit the numbers that you're looking for. So the next thing that happens is you stop just trying to be someone you're not, and you actually look for someone who's doing your job well, and then you try to pretend to be them. But the only problem is when you try to be them, it's very obvious to us who's listening to them that you don't think the same things that are funny to them are funny to you. You're not passionate about the same things that they're passionate about. You don't get excited about the things that they get excited about. So we smell it. We know that you're pretending to be someone you're not. And when that happens, this is the inflection point. I, as a salesperson, which all of you are, okay? I, as a salesperson, think to myself, I'm doing exactly what the #1 salesperson is doing in my role. So if I'm not doing good, it's not my fault anymore. It's their fault. And that's the inflection point that we all hate, right? It's like, oh man, are you telling me that it's not me? It's the customer? And then you turn into belief superiority, and then you turn into know-it-allism, and then that doesn't work, and then you burn out, and you do this vicious cycle 3 more times until you decide to give up on what you're doing and become a project manager, as an example of someone that we just ran into. Shout out to all the project managers, by the way. That's not a diss.
That's not an insult. That's one person we talked to, that's where they ended up. They're like, I'm done with this sales thing. I'm going into something more fun.
So Garret asked me a pointed question. He said, what are some of the things that we noticed around authenticity? This wasn't just authenticity that we were finding in the people that we were interviewing. It was hyper-authenticity. They literally were creating infrastructures so that they could not show up fake. They were creating infrastructure so that they had to show up as the most authentic version of themselves. And so what we call this is intentional ignorance. We were finding across the board that everyone that we were interviewing, they were intentionally ignoring the parts of their business that they didn't enjoy. The parts of their business that they had to pretend like they were excited about. The parts of their business that they would inauthentically act like they were interested when they really weren't. I'll give you an example of this, okay? We interviewed the number one salesperson, let's not use the business name, $8.5 billion startup in LA, okay? Most of you will just know who that is just based off those numbers. He was the number one salesperson at Cisco, he was the number one salesperson at Adobe, now he's the number one salesperson at this startup, and they say that he sells the unsellable. So we interview him. We're like, well, why do they say you sell the unsellable? He's like, I have no idea. I do the same thing every single time. Well, what's that? I look at my lead's name. I don't look at where they come from. I don't look at any of their firmographic information. I do a little bit of research on them, and I show up to the call. And we're like, wait a minute. You ignore the data? Who ignores data in 2022? He's like, I ignore data because I know the propensity of someone to buy from the Northeast versus the Southwest is lower, and if I know that ahead of time, I will treat them differently. And I would rather show up and dictate on that call if I'm going to be different, but I am not going to let the data prove it to me ahead of time.
And this was not just salespeople. We interviewed General Stanley McChrystal, who some of you may have heard of. He ran the joint forces in Afghanistan for years, 48 countries, tens of thousands of soldiers. When he sells something, it's life and death potentially. It's you may not come home if you're not buying into this mission. And he said to us, without us prompting him, we were not talking about intentional ignorance. And he said, you know, a lot of people have this image of a general in their head that they're supposed to come into the room with their chest puffed out and have all the answers and say, you do this and you go there. And he said, I never did that because it would have been impossible for me to know everything about a mission. My job as the leader is to know where to find the information and to empower the people. If I came over here and I said, I know more about this technology than you do, sir or ma'am, who actually built the technology, he's taking away some of their ownership in that part of the mission, and he said he never wanted to do that. So we were, as we started to see this not just in sales, but across organizations, we realized that these people, whether they knew it or not, were setting themselves up to be allowed to not know everything that they know. And think about that from a sales perspective. If you're selling goods and services, you think that you have to know everything about the competitors, and you think that you have to know all of the product details, but these people were not doing that. They knew that it gave them the power to do something that every great salesperson loves to do. And that's go to their customer and say, I don't know the answer to that question you just asked me. Let's go find out together. So now, instead of being the know-it-all and the salesperson, they've got this whole new dynamic where it's, okay, we're going to go find out about this this technical detail that I don't know about. Now you bring in the sales engineer, or you bring in the project manager or the engineer who built it, and now it's you and the customer on one side of the table and that other person on the other side of the table as you're learning together.
Yeah, we have a really good example of this. We interviewed the number one advertising technology salesperson at a pretty large global company. And she hates technology. It's one of the weirdest things that we've encountered. She loves people, she loves building relationships, she doesn't like tech at all. She doesn't even know what API stands for. Neither do I, for the record, but that's not important. So we're sitting there interviewing her, and we're like, if you don't like technology, like, why are you in advertising technology, and how are you so damn good? And she's like, I purposefully don't learn about it. It doesn't excite me. Like, I look at the world like either something gives me energy or it takes it away. And it takes energy away from me, and I don't want to show up and act like I know something that I don't. So I vibe out with my people, and the minute they ask me about a specific technology question, I say, and I can't wait to say, I don't know. But I do know someone smarter than me that does. And whoever that is that she brings in, what Garret just said is so powerful. They bring the sales engineer in, they bring the CEO in, they bring the support in. That support is on one side of the table. And it's her and the customer on the other side of the table. We want to know what API stands for. Not really, but you know what I mean. So anyways, I mean, look, I don't want to belabor authenticity.
I want to do one more. I think there's one more example of creating that infrastructure. I want to talk about these random people that started talking to themselves before we move on to the next
vulnerability.
idea. Exactly.
Well, let's talk about vulnerability then. I mean, it's very easy to get on this stage and say, be vulnerable. But you got to remember something. You can't act authentic. Okay? Like, we're actually telling you to show up as the realest version of yourself because we're trying to prove the point that the world will give you credit for making mistakes. The world will give you credit for being flawed. But if you come off too perfect, the world will smell it because there's no such thing as perfection because we're all human. So if you come off too perfect, we're like, oh, you know what? Something smells funny. And so Garret just brought up a really interesting point. We found this shocking. The greatest salespeople on the planet talk to themselves out loud in front of other people. It's so weird. I can hear the laughs of like some of you do this, so that makes sense.
Yeah.
We saw it once, and then we saw it everywhere. We were interviewing this guy, SVP of a large organization. We're on Zoom. This is during the height of COVID. And we go, introduce yourself. And he goes, hey, my name is Jason. I'm SVP at... Looks up at the ceiling. Why do I keep doing that? Looks back down at us and goes, can I start again? And we're like, sure. And so, he says, I'm a father, I'm a husband. We knew what he was trying to do, right? Like he didn't want to let the title define him. That wasn't the point. The point was that we had been spending hours every day ripping salespeople apart, looking for the good and looking for the bad for this book. We couldn't find a bad thing about this dude, and that wasn't like us. So we went back and we looked at the recording. And we got to this 3 seconds, and we looked at each other and we were like, we're sitting in front of one of the greatest salespeople in the city, and we're expecting him to sell us. But for those 3 seconds, we were thinking there's no way he's selling us at this point. Just for those 3 seconds, we had this weird micro moment of connection. We were like, not now. He took us on this high. In the first 10 minutes of the call, and for the next 40, we never came back down.
And we started seeing it everywhere. So like literally 2 weeks later, we're interviewing one of the top trial lawyers in California. And he's telling us this story. We're talking about, what he does to sell to juries. That's a tough sale, right? Your competitor is literally in the room poking holes in your sale while your customer is sitting in a box right next to you. It's a tough one. And he said there was this trial that he was at, and he had said something, and the judge asked him to repeat himself. And he stopped, and just like the guy on the Zoom, he looked up, and he looked back at the judge, and he said, Your Honor, I have no idea what I just said. And the jury reacted exactly like you all did. They laughed. And from that moment on, they knew in that micro moment that he had that revelation, he was speaking to himself out loud, that they were not being sold to, that he was just a human who was as nervous as they probably were sitting there in the jury box. And he did not do this as a tactic, and he still doesn't, and none of these people do. That's a really important thing. Any sales training that you get, whether it's mindset training or just regular sales training, you can weaponize any of that stuff. But these great people, they're never weaponizing it. They're just doing it because that's authentically who they are.
Yeah, we had a really fun time during the height of COVID. I know that sounds weird, so I'm going to contextualize it a little bit. We were writing this book, so people were sending us all of their Zoom's demos. So we were hearing like all of these different salespeople. We had access to thousands of people we never had before, and we were just like looking through all of these videos, trying to find commonalities, and we found these two really obvious groups of people across a bunch of different verticals. This one group of people who were historically not that good when it came to meeting their quotas, hitting their quotas, selling in general. They were what we were calling underperformers. But during stay at home, like lockdown, COVID, they were crushing. Like they were the number one salespeople in the room. And then the other group of people were historically really great across all of their verticals. As soon as like lockdown hit and they had to switch to Zoom and no one knew what was going on, they were the underperformers. All of a sudden. And so we were trying to figure out why until it became so obvious because all of their conversations sounded almost identical per group. So the first group, the one that historically was bad and then became really good, this is how their conversations sounded. Hey, thanks for hopping on the call. I have no idea if we should even be doing this right now. This is very weird. Yes, that's my 2-year-old behind me. Yes, that's my wife behind me. And I don't even know if we're even supposed to be in the same room. But I will tell you that she has no idea how to teach a 2-year-old, let alone a 22-year-old, and this is very hard for us. But we're figuring it out. And I have no idea if we should even be talking business right now, but I figured I'd just call the elephant in the room out. For some reason, these salespeople, their mindset gave them permission to just tell these people what they actually were feeling in the given moment. And the reason was because they assumed that the people on the other end of the Zoom also thought this was very weird. And they were right. Every single time they were done with their introduction, the person on the other end of the Zoom was like, I am so happy you said this. This is my first pandemic too. This is so freaking weird. This is before we learned how to blur our screens, like we were seeing the insides of people's houses. And you would just watch them vibe for like 10 to 15 minutes before like the customer would say, all right, let's get to work. Before the customer asked the salesperson to sell them. And then you had the other group of people, and all their conversations sounded like this. Thanks for showing up on the Zoom today. Here's our agenda. As if COVID didn't exist. As if people weren't hurting. As if people had no idea what was going on. So I want everyone to just think about not the vulnerability as a tactic, but what was it about them that allowed them to live through a shared experience for the first time and catch a vibe in 12 seconds and ride it all the way to the finish line. And that's what we're talking about in this book, right? How to replicate that mindset.
Well, as long as we're talking about setting up the infrastructure, when Colin and I first started doing this several years ago, we, like most keynote speakers, had slides. And we would come up here and we would follow our slides and we would, do our thing. And we found that very limiting for us because we never like to do the same presentation twice. We get bored. We like to see what the audience is responding to and go wherever they kind of take us. And so we haven't used slides ever since we realized that. And that for us allows us to show up as who we are and do the things that we have the most fun with.
Speaking of fun.
You see where I'm going with this.
Listen,
I'm
only
seeing
2
smiles out here, and I want to do it.
There's 2 people in here that are watching football on their phones. Everyone else is paying attention. Let's do this.
I only saw one. Okay.
Let's go. Let's do this. Let's talk about the uncomfortable.
Can we talk about love?
I thought you were going to say the L word. Yes.
I would like to talk about love. I think this audience can handle it.
All right, we'll see.
All right, let's talk about love.
So look, Garret is talking about a very uncomfortable and cheesy word. Real cheesy. And we are supposed to be the authenticity guys. So this might feel very hypocritical. So let me be very clear. He's talking about the actual word love. In the purest, most realist definition, like love, love, love. Okay? Doesn't make it any less cheesy, but it will in a minute. When I was engaged, happily been married for now 8 years going on 9, or 9 going on 10.
Don't ask me.
All right. 9 going on 10 years. My fiance at the time was really, really big into wedding planning. So much so that she had access to my calendar and she would schedule daily meetings. Happily married for 9 or 10 years.
And still schedule some daily meetings.
And you don't know me too well, but what you should know about me is like punctuality is huge for me. And I would show up to these meetings either right on time or sometimes late. And I would catch myself apologizing a lot. And for some strange reason, I gave myself permission to at least tell these people why I was late. And I'd show up on every call and every in-person meeting, and I'm like, I am so sorry that I was not early. My fiance is a really big wedding planner. Today's controversy was tulips versus roses. And I don't need to explain it to you, I'm just saying I'm sorry. And every single time, I would get one of 2 responses. They would go, don't worry about it, Colin, totally get it. It's gonna be way easier on your second marriage. Or the second response, which is, don't worry about it, Colin, I totally get it. I've been married for X amount of years, happy wife, happy life. I had marital history in the first 10 seconds. I caught a vibe in the first 10 seconds. I had a real relationship in the first 10 seconds. I wasn't losing that deal. That was my deal to lose. Someone just told me that they were divorced in the first 10 seconds. Someone just told me they were married for 46 years in the first 10 seconds. That doesn't happen unless I say what I said. But something weird happened when I said it. They started falling in love with me. And then when they gave it to me, I could do nothing but look for the good in them. And the whole point of this conversation is all of us are too transactional, and all of us are the best version of ourselves when we talk to somebody that we're enamored with. But how often are we enamored with the people that we're talking to? And you know you move differently when that what's her name? What is her name?
So,
Michaela.
They record these things. Someday she's going to find
Michaela,
it.
what's the last?
Michaela Drew.
Michaela Drew. Michaela Drew
Does this
Garret Brown's junior high school crush.
I should never have told him that.
He's happily married too, by the way. How, you were
Longer
14.
than you.
14? You were 14 with Michaela Drew.
Yeah, 13.
The best version of this guy was a 14-year-old version of himself having a crush on Michaela Drew. All of us, okay? In terms of like the best sales person of yourself. Because he didn't talk more, he talked less. He asked more questions because he actually wanted to know the answers. He was looking for the good in her, so when she made a joke that was really unfunny and nobody laughed, this guy was cracking his butt off.
Why are you hiding your finger? I'm right here.
This guy was laughing. And the point of all of this is that this whole conversation that we're having is if you look for the good, you'll find it.
Yes.
When you're selling your people internally, when you're selling your customers externally, when you're selling the board to go and get different decisions, when you're selling investors on raising more money, it's a conversation, are people looking for the good in you or not?
And so when we train people, whether we're working with teams, whether we're teaching our students, we teach them how to get into this frame of mind, because you do move differently when you are quote unquote in love with someone, or at least in love with the idea of someone. So we're the salespeople by trade in the room. Are there any?
Yeah, all of them, right?
Besides everybody, but yeah, okay. So you may, as you're going through sales training, a lot of times they'll teach you what's called a 3x3. And the way that this is taught in traditional sales training is that before any sales call, sales meeting, you spend 3 minutes looking for 3 things about the person or people that you're going to meet with that you can use in the conversation. So that might mean that if you are going in to sell software security, as we once were, somebody doing a 3x3 might go in and they might see that the customer's company had a security breach recently, and they could use that in the conversation. Or they're looking for things to artificially build rapport that they can relate over at the beginning, right? That's fine, I guess, but the problem that we have with that sort of thinking is that it's very transactional, and it's meant to be leveraged and used against the person that you're talking to. And if you haven't figured out by now, we don't love that sort of thing. Love, that was not intentional. But the way we teach it is we teach you to spend 3 minutes looking for 3 things about the person that you're going to talk to that you love about them.
Real love.
That you genuinely love about them. Go on LinkedIn. See if they are involved in an autistic kids charity and you have an autistic child and you love that about them. Or you love their career trajectory because it sort of mirrors what yours was and you're curious and excited to talk to them. If people do that and they spend that 3 minutes looking for 3 things that they love or at least could love about a person, completely changes the way that they show up and interact with that person when they jump on the phone or when they get into that meeting room.
Yep. It's Garret said something that I think we should just pull out a little bit. I know that we're running low on time, but
yeah.
He gave the example, like, I researched this person and found out that they do charity for autistic conversations, or I have a timer.
Oh, you got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you tell me?
Yeah.
Since I'm the one driving you.
We got 10 minutes. We got 10 minutes, and then we go to Q&A.
All right, cool.
Autistic. He gave the autistic example that you did research on someone. They do autistic charity work, and you love that about them because they have an autistic child. He said the thing about falling in love is, like, you look for yourself in the people that you are trying to fall in love with. Like, you can't fall in love with someone for real in 3 minutes. There's no possible way. But you know what you could do? You could fall in love with the idea of someone in 3 minutes. And then that person can disappoint you. But if you think about like this conversation that Garrett's having right now, like we do this activity in our class all the time, right?
First week of class, every semester.
We pair every student in the room and we go fall in love with each other. And they freak out, like
Where you literally start to see some of them open up their laptop and like look for another class to take. They're like, I thought this was a sales class. What are we doing?
You got like the senior football player that's about to be a multimillionaire going to the league next year with like the poli-sci freshman major. And we tell them one hint. The only hint is this. Think about what questions you would have to ask to actually try to fall in love. And what happens every time we do it?
Every single time, the F word comes up as we start to talk about what happened. Fate. It was fate that we sat next to each other. She's from rural Ohio, and I grew up in rural Ohio. Or she's a black belt in Taekwondo, and I'm a black belt in Muay Thai, or whatever. Like, there's always some kind of similarity, and it's always fate that all these students stand next to each other, or sat next to each other, and ended up having these conversations. And so we dig into that, and we say, oh, it's fate. We smile, because we see it every semester, and we realize that. So we go, when did you realize that you loved this person? And they're all using the L word by then. They're saying, I love this person, I love that person. When did you realize that? And it's always, always, always the moment that they saw themselves in the other person.
Like, think about that for a second. We didn't tell them to look for themselves in people. We said, go fall in love. We didn't ask them to ask questions based on their own morals and values. But that's what you do. If you ask someone to fall in love with someone, you go to yourself, what's familiar to you. And you know what? You know who you can't be adversarial with? Yourself. Like, the problem with sales is that sometimes it's a competitive adversarial relationship. But if you can see yourself in these people, something dramatic happens. You move differently. I will give a real world example. We'll close out strong with our stuff. We'll do a little Q&A.
I love it.
All right. Raise your hand if you know who Bob Dylan is. Cool. All right. We were hired by a company with a sales team that was flatlining. Except this one guy, the number one hitter in the room. He was great. So great that he told us that he didn't need us. In fact,
that was gentle.
He really hated that we were in the building. He called us, I think, 2 punk kids. That's an actual quote. And so I'm sitting there with Garret, and we pull him over aside, and we go, look, do us a favor. Fall in love with this lead. Just for 3 minutes, in front of everybody, research this person and fall in love with them. And in front of everybody, okay, as loud as he can be, even though we pulled him over to the side, he was like, I'm not taking this lead. He's like embarrassing us in front of the entire group that we're supposed to be inspiring. And so we're like, well, screw it. We might as well just have this conversation in front of everybody. Please, just do it as an example. Lead by example. And he goes, you guys don't get it. It's not a qualified lead. In fact, he said, it's not a qualified lead. He's like, I still don't like this guy. He said, it's not a qualified lead. And we said, okay, then you don't have to take the lead when you're done researching it. Just do the exercise for us. So the dude said, fine. Sits in front of the computer, and just like a movie, you got the entire sales force around him. And he's sitting there and he's typing away. And he goes, And we go, what? And he goes, he graduated high school the same year as me. And we go, you love that? He goes, no. Well, okay. Huh. What? He went to the University of Minnesota. You love the University of Minnesota? No. Bob Dylan went to the University of Minnesota. You love Bob Dylan? Yes. Spent another 2 minutes researching, and finally it was done. We were like, thank you. You've proven our point. We're all good. Even you can fall in love with the idea of someone. We'll now give this lead to someone else, probably a newbie, because it's an unqualified lead. And he said, not a chance in hell that you're going to take this lead from me. I just spent 3 minutes falling in love with this dude. The least I can do is see if he even knew who Dylan was, let alone if he was at school at the same time Dylan was. So he gets on the Zoom call with this person. I've never seen a bro fest in my entire life. Not only did he go to school at the same time that Dylan went there, but he's a huge Dylan fan, and they actually saw them play at the same place and didn't even know each other back then, 30 some odd years ago. And the guy bought. And so we do an after-action review. The guy comes back in the room, the salesperson, he goes, hey, I just want to let you know, the reason that guy bought was not because I fell in love with him. It was because our product fit the need that he was looking for. And Garrett and I said, that makes a bunch of sense, except you told us you would never have taken that lead if it weren't for us. You see what I'm saying? If you look for the good, you'll find it. If you look for the bad, you'll find it. The brain is malleable. We could give you so many examples around psychics and around research.
Maybe during Q&A, people can
not
ask
gonna
about
do
those
that,
things, because we
so
got the high sign here.
Why don't we close out on a high note then?
Okay.
Raise your hand if you have goals. We heard you were an honest group. Keep your hands up, please. Keep your hands up if you have goals. No goals? Goals. Raise your hand if you have goals. All right, now only put your hands down if you have goals that are written down that you look at every day. Everybody else, keep your hands up. Keep your hands up only if you have goals that are written down you look at every day. Okay, about half, keep your hands up. Okay, about half of you put your hands down. Now keep them up if you still do that. Keep them up. Now only keep your hands up if in addition to having goals written down, articulated that you look at every single day, you also have a purpose statement written down, articulated, and you look at it every day. 1, 2. So a lot of hands just slowly go down. 1, 2. Okay, so we had a room full of 200 people and 200 hands went up, and now we have a room of 6 hands. I want everyone to just take a second and hear me out. We were goal-oriented people beyond belief. And every time we interviewed people, we asked them about their goal practices. And what happened every time we brought up goals?
They talked about their purpose.
Like they didn't even have them.
We talked to so many people. We never said the word purpose, and they would lead with it. We talked to the CMO of Atlassian, huge company, 250,000 customers. Within 30 seconds, he is beautifully articulating his purpose, and he's telling us that that's why he's been successful in his career. That's how he hires people. That's how, when he markets and sells, he always has that in the back of his mind, and he was not the only one.
Yeah. Look, we're going to end on this, and we'll do some Q&A if you have any questions, but a lot of people will look at like the salesperson and go, that person's just got it. You know, like I don't know what it is, they just got the gift of gab. Like the person in the middle of the room, and everyone feels like they have this like intimate connection with them, even though they've never met them before, and everybody else feels the same way about this person, unbeknownst to the person next to them feeling the same exact way. You want to know what that is? Like that person, that it factor? It's not that they have the gift of gab. It's not that they have this great energy that's magnetic. It's that they have their purpose defined, and one of two things are happening. Either they see their purpose in you, and you feel it, or they've already articulated their purpose, and once you've articulated a purpose, you can tell if you're talking to someone who is also purpose-driven. One of two things. It's not that they were born sociable or self-confident or a great salesperson. It's that they took the time to articulate their purpose, and once you do it, you see it everywhere. So I guess for us,
we see our purpose in all of you. Thank you all for letting us talk to you all here for the last hour.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys.
Do we have time for questions?
You guys want to do Q&A?
You want to hang out?
Yeah, let's hang out. Any questions?
We get tired. We're going to sit.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
I'm really curious about this whole idea of like intentional ignorance.
Yeah.
Like not following, like the story you said about, oh, it's not a qualified lead.
Yeah.
Really is, how does one then prioritize and like take out the noise?
Yeah.
If that's the whole purpose of data, right? Otherwise, it could be,
Yeah.
it feels like you're just
100%.
It's an important question, and there are certain things, no matter what you do, that you have to know. Right, especially if you're selling something. There are things that you just have to know in order to not come across looking ignorant, literally ignorant, or unqualified. So identifying that, having the self-awareness to identify those things first, that's That's the thing we first tell you to do. What are the non-negotiables? You have to know this. And sometimes that stuff is stuff that doesn't quite align with your passion. Then from there, the next thing that we recommend is what resources do you have available to you? And you can start to think out of the box there, because whether your company provides them to you or not, there's probably resources you have that you don't even think about, like previous customers or other experts outside of the organization or whatever. And those two things will usually start to help you triangulate the things that you can stay intentionally ignorant about if you're not passionate about them and if they're not going to have you showing up as the version of yourself you want to show up as.
Yeah, and I'll give you a completely different answer. We tell this to our students all the time. What you are good at and what you love doing are not always the same thing. And so the question around intentional ignorance is, how do you create a space where what you're good at and what you love doing converge? And so when you think about, like, what can you ignore? Think about that. Like, think about the concentric circles and think about in the middle. Like, are you doing what you're good at? And are you doing what you love doing? And are they the same thing? And normally they're not, but you start to look for that. And like we said, this is a whole conversation about the brain being malleable. You look for things, you'll find it. So it's a really good question. I hope that helps.
Yeah.
So why did you not talk to Snoop Dogg's mom?
He wouldn't let us. We asked him if we could talk. She asked why we did not talk to Snoop Dogg's mom.
Yeah, but if she's a salesperson, it's a
Yeah.
100%. You know what the quote that Snoop's mom gave him that he gave us was, as long as you walk this earth being your true self, everything will be fine. It's actually quite sad because his mother passed recently, prior to that conversation, but we would love to talk to anyone's mom because they're normally the best salesperson in any room. He goes, mom, CEO, everybody else. Who else? Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, we'll defer.
Quick question. So I think what you said about connecting to people really resonated with me. I've been an educator for a long time.
Yeah.
But there's also this other persona. So we talked about Martin Luther King Jr., but we also talked about Elon Musk or Steve Jobs. They were not trying to connect to anyone. And most of the times, they were not the nicest persons in the room. So there is a dissonance to these two types of people who we consider great salespeople. And I really sort of confirm with what you said. What do you think about, what do you have to say about the other
that's a really important point.
Question.
That's a really important. His question is, Steve Jobs and Elon Musk aren't known for connecting with people necessarily. So are they really falling in love with the people they're talking to? Are they really good? And I think that's a really good question, or a really good point, or allows us to make a really good point, which is that any advice that you get from any source, whether it's the person who sounds really smart with 150,000 Twitter followers, or people on stage talking to you, or an expert in a field, no advice is exactly right for every single person. And when we talk about authenticity, that's a big part of what we talk about. What works for Colin does not work for me. If I got up here and tried to tell the stories in the way that Colin tells a great story, I would look like an idiot, because I don't react to the same portions of the stories that he does, and vice versa. So I would argue that Steve Jobs and Elon Musk are actually being incredibly authentic versions of themselves, and they are setting themselves up to be the best sellers that they can be based on their personality and based on who they are. And that's part of staying intentionally ignorant too. Like, if you are so introverted that the idea of connecting with another person gives you physical anxiety, then maybe falling in love the way that we just talked about it is not the way for you to fall in love. Maybe it's for you to look for something else that you are attracted to about a person, like something more intellectual or something that has nothing to do with their business. So I would argue that easily Steve Jobs and Elon Musk were and are incredibly authentic to who they are. So that's a great point as well. There's no such thing as one size fits all advice, and I'm glad you asked that.
Let me give you another perspective, because he's right. Although I would probably, we don't have enough time, but I could have a spirited debate around those two definitely being in love with a lot of aspects of what they do, which is why they show up. Here's what they're great at: creating a sense of agency. Like, in fact, if you leave this room and you only remember one thing from us, remember this. The most important thing for a great salesperson to do is never strip the sense of agency away from the people they're selling. Agency, by definition, meaning that you feel in control of your decision-making facilities, that you feel part of the process. You know, the problem is that people think that a great salesperson means you have all the answers. Most of the time when we're saying no to people, it's because they're right. You said you were going to spend the money. You said this was important. You said this was the priority. You said it was going to happen anyways. Like, yes, 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 I'm in a corner. Okay, so you ready to buy? No. Why? Because you're right. It's not my decision. So when you think about the Martin Luther Kings or the Elon Musks or the Donald Trumps or anyone else in the world, what they do a really good job of is making it feel like it's your idea. Like, you ever heard someone like ask a question? Have you ever answered a question that no one's ever asked you before? Like, someone asked you a fire question, which, by the way, like, can only happen if you care differently. You're only asking the question nobody else asked if you care differently. So that whole love thing was very real. Like, you want to ask a great question that no one's ever heard before? Whatever happens, we know for sure that the person answering is ideating for the first time in real time, and whatever the answer is, it's theirs. They're not getting sold, they bought. So I think, to answer your question straightforward, like, what they're really good at is creating a sense of agency and empowering people through it. Yes?
Last question.
Okay.
We already have one.
Should I ask? Okay.
Hello. You guys did a great job.
Thank you.
My name is JR. And I'm not in the IT-related field at all, not even close, but I'm in sales. And my question to you is, I'm not very good at Zoom selling or even, email. I cannot sell anything on email. But I can sell when I meet somebody. Can you tell me one or two things that would really work for somebody who's not in IT, and not just for me, for everybody here, that would work for them who cannot or would not like to sell on Zoom or maybe any text or email?
Yeah.
That would help us a lot. Thank you.
I'm assuming that in-person meetings are not always an option for you.
No, it's not.
So you need to figure, okay.
So here's what I would say. The first thing is sales is about prolonged gratification, not immediate gratification, right? So like when you're thinking about selling, think about earning the next 10 seconds of interest, right? Like, don't enter the conversation trying to win. I think like some of the greatest cold callers in the world, let me back up. You know Martha Stewart? I mean, not Martha Stewart. You know who Barbara Walters is? Barbara Walters, raise your hand if you know who Barbara Walters is. Great. Nobody in our class this year.
Our students are Gen Z, they have no idea. When we started asking that question, like half the class's hands go up, and then over the years it went down. This semester, 0.
So we know this is the last question, so I'll give you this antidote. So they interviewed Barbara Walters. They said, how is it that you can always make celebrities cry when you interview them? Like, they know it's coming. Like George Clooney and everyone else, like they go out and they say it's a rite of passage not to cry if you've been interviewed by Barbara Walters. And so they interview, like, how do you do it? She goes, I write down a bunch of questions on note cards. I throw away the ones I don't like. I reorder them. And I just continue that process over and over again until I feel good about it. And the operative word there is reorder. You see, because the only thing that you have in Zoom selling or phone calls, right, is that you know where your finish line is. But normally the people on the other end of the Zoom, they think your finish line is different than what it actually is. So like some of the greatest cold callers in the world, they sound like this. Hey, I am calling from TiEcon. I'm assuming you've heard of us before. The person on the other end of the phone thinks that's their finish line. So the person goes, nope, haha, right? Never heard of you guys before. I can get out of this, right? But that wasn't the finish line for the salesperson. The finish line for the salesperson was, how can I get as quickly as possible to a point where this person realizes I'm a real person and not some a-hole salesperson that's calling during dinner. So when they go no, the salesperson goes, oh, let me back up. Let me tell you why I'm calling, and you can tell me if there's even a point in us staying on the phone. That was the finish line. That earned them 10 seconds. The person on the other line was like, oh, I'm talking to a human being. All right, fine, I'll give him another 10 seconds and then I'll let him down quickly because he already gave me permission to let him down. You see what I'm saying? So I guess the answer to your question is think about the finish line and make sure it's not the same as the people that you're talking to.
I see some very uncomfortable people because we've talked too long, and by we, I mean you.
Okay.
We have loved being here. I saw a lot of hands that didn't get to ask questions. We are on Twitter and Instagram at Colin and Garret. That's our website. Please reach out and send us those questions, and we will do our best to answer every single one. Thank you all very much.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Garret and Colin.